The Adapt Now report then goes into a few key systems where it wants to accelerate adaptation. So agriculture, natural environment, water, cities and urban areas, infrastructure, and disaster risk management. I won't go into the details, but just show you a few highlights. For example, this is the map of the areas of high agricultural risk for different climate hazards in vulnerable areas. So you can see Africa promptly shows up with parts of the Middle East, geopolitically tense regions, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Southeast Asia, South America and Central America, and these island states here, and so on. And climate variability can be just very high to manage agriculture and crops, can be growing season reductions because of the climate change, high temperature during growing season, which at some below some threshold it can actually favor growth, but beyond a certain temperature the crop wilting may set in, and combination of two or more climate hazards in these magenta areas, which hits the breadbasket of India, for example, here, and also sensitive regions of the Indus River up there. So there are studies that argue about how climate could influence natural security issues, armed conflicts, and so on and so forth. But in this situation, the adaptation options include crop choices, various policy options, various crop insurance type tools, and other adaptation under food system that we talked about in the drawdown course or in the other books that we looked at. So agriculture remains one of the highly vulnerable areas, especially for the global south countries where food security and political security and stability of the governance and so on are often intimately tied together. So that's a very critical area and requires very close attention to adaptation. As for natural environment, the relationship between natural environment and climate change adaptation by sector, you have water, regulation of water flows and reduction of floods and soil erosion. So this is the natural environment that supports resilience across sector, which include things like nature-based solutions, what are called natural climate solutions. I have podcasts on that in Bending the Curve and other courses on Earth system science for adaptation and mitigation and so on that you can look up. So the other systems here: food, cities, infrastructure, supply chains, disaster risk management, and health. So you can see I mentioned food security and soil fertility already, water and soil restoration. We talked about tree intercropping, multistrata agroforestry, and so on. Urban cooling, water supply, flood protection, slope stabilization, water storage, and flood control. And the idea is also that makes an emphasis that is emphasized in this report is that each of these things now must consider all decisions in terms of understanding financial policies, implementation, etc. have to consider climate risk always as part of the decision making. This is a really important thing in terms of internalizing climate risk in every decision now. That was not always the case. For example, if you're going to build a new bridge, it has to consider sea level rise, extreme events, etc., landslides, whatever. And if you're building close to the coast, you have to worry about sea level rise, storms, cyclones, inundations, storm surge, etc. Supply chains, of course, again, sustainable production landscapes and rural livelihoods, floods and coastal protection for disaster risk management. COVID has highlighted the infectious disease parts, but the chronic food and waterborne diseases and infectious diseases, vector-borne diseases, zoonotic diseases still remain. So pollutants and pathogen control, cooling, and psychological well-being. There is plenty of evidence now that climate change is beginning to have serious psychological impacts in many places. There is a general climate anxiety that is talked about now because there is a constant talk about how many things are going wrong with climate change. So this is something that has to be considered as well in terms of just the messaging versus giving optimistic vision for the future, as well as saying solutions are possible and what are the realistic options for saving the planet and saving ourselves. So under natural systems, we have financing nature-based solutions. This is an example. Nature-based solutions basically include forestry management, tree cropping, mangrove forests, coral reefs, wetlands, salt marshes, all these things. Financing nature-based solutions. Canada $2 billion disaster mitigation and adaptation fund enables communities to better manage risks from natural hazards like floods, wildfires, droughts through investment in natural and constructed infrastructure. One can $25. It's a strange name. No, sorry. That's one Canadian $25 million investment is restoring salt marshes and improving dikes along the Bay of Fundy in Nova Scotia. Netherlands is doing a lot of these sorts of things as well. The project will reduce coastal flooding for tens of thousands of residents and businesses, World Heritage sites, indigenous communities, and more than 20,000 hectares of farmland. So food security is involved as well. Okay, so obviously these, as we remember, also have additional carbon sequestration, biodiversity, increased oxygen and habitats, fish production, migratory birds, and many other advantages. So maybe I'll stop this and come to the other sectors in the next podcast. It's a little bit short, but that's okay.